At 10:48 p.m. on March 25th, 2022, a young mother made her final desperate call to emergency services, not knowing she had just 2 minutes left to live. 21-year-old Mackenzie Anderson was everything her friends described as vibrant and full of life. Known as Max to those who loved her, she was the beating heart of every gathering, dancing with friends until sunrise, watching sunsets paint the Newcastle coastline, and documenting her adventures across TikTok, Facebook, and Instagram. Her social media showed a young woman embracing life's possibilities, laughing with friends, exploring new places, and most importantly, cherishing every moment with her 1-year-old son, whom she called my love bug and my caterpillar. But behind the smiling photos and cheerful videos, Mackenzie was fighting a battle that few people knew about. Since the age of 16, Mackenzie had struggled with methamphetamine addiction, a demon that had followed her into adulthood. However, when her son was born, everything changed. She was actively working to turn her life around, determined to give her child the stable, loving home she wanted him to have. She had started a new relationship and, according to those close to her, was genuinely hopeful for the year ahead. In late 2019, Mackenzie's life took a devastating turn when she met Tyrone Thompson. He was 22 years old, just a year older than Mackenzie, and initially seemed like someone who could understand her struggles. Thompson had his own troubled past, a childhood filled with unimaginable trauma that included a violent schizophrenic father, sexual abuse by a teacher, and constant exposure to domestic violence. What Mackenzie didn't know was that Thompson's traumatic background had left him with complex post-traumatic stress disorder and a severe personality disorder. More dangerously, it had given him an obsessive need to control every aspect of the people he claimed to love. Their relationship would later be described as marred by domestic violence from the start, began with Thompson's charming facade quickly crumbling to reveal his true nature. His need for control wasn't subtle, it was immediate and terrifying. He monitored Mackenzie's every move, isolated her from friends, and used both physical violence and psychological manipulation to keep her trapped. Thompson's mental state was particularly concerning. He harbored bizarre delusions, believing he was being poisoned by microplastics that were turning him into a woman, and that he was being controlled by a government run by the Kardashians. These weren't just harmless quirks. They were symptoms of a deeply disturbed mind that would prove capable of unthinkable violence. What made Thompson even more dangerous was his complete unpredictability. Forensic psychiatrists would later confirm that while he suffered from serious mental health issues, he was not psychotic at the time of his most violent acts. This meant he knew exactly what he was doing. But Mackenzie didn't know any of this when she fell into his web. By late 2021, those closest to Mackenzie began noticing changes. She started sharing photos of bruises with her friends, painful evidence of Thompson's escalating violence. These weren't accidents or isolated incidents. They were part of a systematic campaign of terror that Thompson was waging against the young mother. Mackenzie began reaching out to domestic violence services, desperately seeking help with security doors and cameras for her home. She knew she was in danger, and she was trying everything she could think of to protect herself and her son. The email she sent to these organizations painted a picture of a woman who understood the gravity of her situation but felt powerless to escape it. During this time, Mackenzie confided in her friends about something that would prove to be tragically prophetic. She told them, with absolute certainty, that Thompson would kill her. It wasn't a dramatic statement or an exaggeration born from a moment of anger. It was a calm, terrified prediction from a woman who knew her abuser better than anyone else. Thompson's behavior was becoming increasingly erratic and violent. In October 2021, his actions finally caught up with him when he was arrested and charged with assaulting Mackenzie, intimidating her, and damaging her property. the court sentenced him to a maximum of 10 months imprisonment. For a brief moment, Mackenzie could breathe. Thompson was behind bars, and she was finally safe. But the relief wouldn't last long, and Thompson's absence would only serve to fuel his obsession with controlling her. While Thompson sat in his jail cell, Mackenzie tried to rebuild her life. She had taken out an apprehended violence order, a legal document designed to protect her from further abuse. The order explicitly prohibited Thompson from having any contact with her or approaching her home. It was a piece of paper that was supposed to keep her safe. During Thompson's incarceration, something significant happened that should have extended his time away from Mackenzie. In an appeal, his non-parole period was actually reduced from the original 5 months to just 4 months and 2 weeks. This decision would prove to be fatal. What nobody fully understood at the time was that Thompson's time in prison hadn't rehabilitated him or given him perspective on his actions. Instead, it had only intensified his obsession with Mackenzie. He spent his days thinking about her, planning his return, and nurturing the twisted belief that she belonged to him. Thompson was also developing a reputation within the prison system as someone uniquely dangerous and unpredictable. His violent tendencies weren't limited to intimate partner relationships. They extended to anyone who crossed his path. As his release date approached, Mackenzie's anxiety grew. She knew that the piece of paper protecting her would mean nothing to someone like Thompson. She had lived with his violence and seen his complete disregard for rules, laws, and basic human decency. She didn't know it yet, but her worst fears were about to be realized. March 9th, 2022 should have been just another day, but for Mackenzie Anderson, it became the beginning of her final countdown. That was the day Tyrone Thompson walked out of prison, having served just over 4 months of his sentence. What happened next would demonstrate just how meaningless legal protections can be when facing someone determined to cause harm. Within hours of his release, the very same day, Thompson violated his parole conditions and the apprehended violence order by calling Mackenzie. His message was chilling. He told her he was coming for her and that he loved her. It was a declaration of ownership disguised as affection, and Mackenzie understood the threat immediately. Thompson didn't stop with a single phone call. He created multiple social media accounts to reach out to her when she blocked his primary profiles. He contacted people who knew her new partner, attempting to gather information about her life and whereabouts. His behavior showed a level of premeditation that made it clear this wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a calculated campaign of harassment. The very next day, March 10th, Thompson's violent tendencies erupted again when he assaulted his own father. Despite this clear violation of his parole and evidence of his continued dangerous behavior, he was granted conditional bail. Thompson would go on to breach the apprehended violence order 8 times in the days following his release. 8 times, the legal system had evidence that Thompson posed a clear and present danger to Mackenzie. 8 times, the opportunities to intervene and protect her were missed. Each breach should have been a red flag. Each violation should have sent him back to prison. Instead, Thompson remained free, and his obsession with Mackenzie continued to escalate. For the next 6 days, Mackenzie and Thompson spent time together sporadically. To outsiders, this might have seemed like a reconciliation, but those closest to Mackenzie knew better. She was walking a tightrope, trying to manage Thompson's volatile emotions while protecting herself and her son. During this time, Mackenzie's fear was palpable to her friends. She continued to share her conviction that Thompson would kill her, even as she tried to navigate the impossible situation she found herself in. She had tried legal protection, physical separation, and every other option she could think of, but nothing had been enough to keep Thompson away. On March 24th, just 1 day before the murder, Thompson allegedly breached the AVO again at Berkeley Vale. The pattern was clear, The danger was escalating and time was running out. Meanwhile, Thompson's mental state was deteriorating further. His time in prison had done nothing to address his underlying issues or reduce his potential for violence. If anything, his forced separation from Mackenzie had only intensified his need to control her. The stage was set for a tragedy that multiple systems had failed to prevent. March 25th, 2022 began like many others, but it would end with a level of violence that would leave even seasoned investigators struggling to comprehend what they witnessed. That afternoon, Thompson, Mackenzie, and one of her male friends gathered at her Crebot Street unit in Mayfield. They drank alcohol and socialized, and for a brief moment it might have seemed like a normal gathering among friends. But those who knew Thompson understood that his mood could shift without warning, and Mackenzie remained on edge. After consuming just 2 drinks, Thompson's demeanor changed dramatically. He became emotional and began telling Mackenzie how much he loved her, and that she didn't appreciate the things he did for her. It was the kind of possessive declaration that those familiar with domestic violence recognize as a dangerous warning sign. As the afternoon wore on, Mackenzie's discomfort grew. She asked Thompson to leave, but her request only seemed to agitate him further. The tension in the room became unbearable, and Mackenzie sent a text to her friend that would prove to be prophetic. "Don't leave me alone with him." Then Thompson did something that sent chills through everyone present. He began moving knives around the kitchen, deliberately and purposefully. He pulled a large blade from the drawer and placed it on the counter where everyone could see it. The message was clear: he was preparing for violence. Around 9:30 p.m., Mackenzie's friend managed to convince Thompson to leave. He walked with him toward the train station, hoping to defuse the situation and ensure Thompson actually left the area. But Thompson had no intention of staying gone. After appearing to leave peacefully, Thompson doubled back to Mackenzie's unit. He climbed a ladder to reach her second-floor balcony and broke into her home while she slept. Mackenzie woke to find Thompson in her bedroom, using her mobile phone as if he belonged there. The violation of finding him in her most private space, having broken in while she was unconscious and vulnerable, must have been terrifying. Once again, her friend convinced Thompson to leave, and once again, Thompson appeared to comply. But around 10:40 p.m., Mackenzie realized that Thompson wasn't going to stay away. In desperation, she called 000, Australia's emergency number. Her words to the emergency operator painted a picture of a woman who knew she was in mortal danger. "My ex-boyfriend's broken in. I've woken up to him in my house. I have an AVO on him. He came at me with a knife." She also told the operator something that showed just how well she understood the threat Thompson posed. He may have a knife still, because there was 2 that he had out, and only one of them is here. Mackenzie Anderson, in what would be her final conversation with anyone outside her immediate vicinity, was calmly and clearly explaining to emergency services that her ex-boyfriend had broken into her home, threatened her with knives, and was likely still armed. She was asking for help. She was following all the proper procedures. She had done everything the system told her to do. 8 minutes later, Mackenzie sent her final text message to her male friend. Thompson had returned. Thompson's final assault on Mackenzie began at approximately 10:48 p.m. and lasted until 10:50 p.m. In those 120 seconds, Thompson stabbed Mackenzie Anderson 78 times with 2 kitchen knives. The attack was so ferocious that one of the knives actually snapped from the force of Thompson's strikes. Neighbours heard the attack and called police, while others came outside to try to help. One witness looked through a gap in the blocked door and saw Thompson, standing over her, repeatedly stabbing her while not saying a word. Mackenzie tried to escape. She fought for her life, but she was trapped with a man who had finally decided to make good on the threat he had been holding over her for years. When police arrived at the scene, They found Mackenzie lying outside her unit with the broken knife handle resting on her chest. Her 1-year-old son was present at the scene, covered in his mother's blood, but physically unharmed. Paramedics and police attempted to save Mackenzie's life, but the damage was too extensive. She died at the scene, just as she had predicted she would. Thompson was arrested immediately, bleeding from a hand injury he had sustained during his frenzied attack. When questioned by police, he showed no remorse and no insight into the magnitude of what he had done. Thompson told investigating officers, "She had a knife, and then I've just literally grabbed the knife and I just stabbed her. It took as many times to stab her till she stopped." His words revealed the calculated nature of his violence. This wasn't a moment of passion or a single strike in anger. This was a sustained, deliberate attack designed to ensure that Mackenzie Anderson would never be able to leave him again. For nearly 3 years, Thompson maintained his innocence, claiming he had acted in self-defense. He forced Mackenzie's family and friends to live with the uncertainty of a trial, prolonging their grief and preventing them from finding closure. Just 1 week before his scheduled trial, Thompson finally changed his plea to guilty of murder. On May 2, 2025, Justice Richard Weinstein sentenced Thompson to 22 years and 6 months imprisonment with a non-parole period of 15 years and 6 months. The sentence sparked outrage from Mackenzie's family. Her mother, Tabitha Ackert, called it an insult to women globally. The Crown appealed, calling it manifestly inadequate, but in November 2025, the appeal was dismissed. Tabitha Ackert's grief transformed into fierce determination. After Mackenzie's death, she discovered domestic violence services had finally responded to her daughter's pleas for help, with a message stating they were closing your request for support because you are now dead. She launched a petition that gathered over 30,000 signatures. Her advocacy achieved something historic. On November 18, 2025, New South Wales Parliament passed legislation establishing a 25-year standard non-parole period for murdering a current or former intimate partner, the first time in Australian history such a law had been enacted. Mackenzie's case exposed catastrophic failures in domestic violence protection. Thompson had breached the AVO 8 times before killing her, yet remained free.